we're going to
DMT.
talk tonight about both DMT and ayahuasca. So
Yes,
let's cover them both together because save repeating
that makes
ourselves.
sense.
Right? So let's start with ayahuasca because that's how it started. Ayahuasca is a drink which was been used for many hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, by the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin. And when it was worked out what was in it, it was discovered that it contained DMT. But when people extracted the DMT and ate the DMT, nothing happened. And that was a bit of a paradox. So what's going on? Why can you drink ayahuasca and get a powerful psychedelic effect, whereas you the active ingredient and it doesn't work? And that's because your body has an enzyme called monoamine oxidase. And that enzyme is really useful because that enzyme prevents poisons, toxins getting into your body. So you have it in the cells of your gut and you have it in your liver. So if you drink DMT, your gut and your liver destroy it, so it never gets to the brain. Now, what is so remarkable about ayahuasca, and this ayahuasca possibly the first scientific piece of polypharmacy. The indigenous peoples discovered that if you brew up the ayahuasca plant with another plant, that you can drink it and it works. And that's because the DMT isn't broken down because the other plant makes a substance called a beta-carboline. And there are a number of them, but one of the most common ones is harmaline. And that blocks the enzyme. So when you drink ayahuasca, the enzyme that breaks down DMT is blocked. So the DMT gets through your gut or your liver and up to your brain. So ayahuasca is drinkable DMT and it works. And it actually is interesting also because drinking it means you've got a reservoir in your stomach. So the effect lasts for quite a few hours. In fact, for some people, it's overnight. Now, when people started researching pure DMT, extracting it or manufacturing it, they had to give it either intravenously, which is what we do in our research. People often snort it or smoke it. And that gives a very different profile. So in a way, DMT and ayahuasca are very different drugs because snorted or smoked DMT or injected DMT gives you a massive hit. It's like you go from relaxed to somewhere else, another dimension, through a wormhole, you may be in another universe in the space of a few seconds. So DMT has a reputation for being a very powerful drug, but that's because you basically change your brain very rapidly. When it's taken as ayahuasca, it's gentler, and people slowly move into a state of wonder and insight and communion with the universe, etc., which is obviously quite central to the healing and transformational powers of ayahuasca.
Yes, it's absolutely marvelous, isn't it? It's so incredible that these indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest were boiling these leaves together, creating these teas, and they just came up with this absolutely incredible pharmacy mix of two different leaves, which combined in a really interesting pharmacokinetic way, and it just produced this insane property. I mean, could you imagine what that felt like for the first time? They've been boiling leaves as a society for many years, and then suddenly they boil these two ones together, and it's like, what the hell is going on here? Like, have a completely different effect. It's marvelous. It's so fascinating.
Well, that's one of the great things. That's one of the great things about psychedelics. Psychedelics don't mess with your memory. In fact, one of the theories I have as to why psychedelics work is because your brain has the receptors that psychedelics work on in the brain is the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor, and that's a peculiar receptor. We don't really know why that receptor's there. I started working on that receptor. I did the first study of that receptor myself. It only just been discovered in 1984, and we thought, well, there's a lot of these receptors in the brain, and they're all in the high cortical regions. Wow, let's block them. Things are going to change. We blocked them. Very little happened. You had deep sleep, but not much else. And wow, that's weird. Why are they there? And of course, in those days, it was just too difficult to study the agonist at the receptor. So we blocked it. Not much happened. And then eventually, 30 years on, when we start stimulating it with DMT, wow, everything happens. So then why have you got receptors for DMT in your brain? Well, some people think your brain makes DMT. And that's another story, but we'll come back to that if you want in a minute. But why it probably isn't. They're not there for endogenous DMT, but they're probably there for when something really important happens, that you remember it, because and then you act on it. So the analogy I like to use is the first person who was rubbing sticks together and made fire. Wow. I mean, that's the primary transformational discovery of
Right.
humanity. And the insight, so the receptors weren't helping people, it wasn't driving the rubbing the sticks together, but my God, when suddenly the insight, I can make fire anywhere. Wow. I mean, boy, I reckon that insight would have been laid down through the networks that are controlled by those receptors.
So interesting. I do want to ask you on the if DMT is created by the brain or not.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was pretty solid science, that the brain does create dimethyltryptamine. Is that story not fully correct?
Well, the brain can make DMT. That's true. There are enzymes in the brain to make it. Our estimates are that it can't make enough. So, there are people who think when you're dying, it makes a lot. There's some animal work suggests it might. So it's not implausible, but I think it's probably not. So there was a theory that the DMT causes dreaming, but then we know if we block those receptors, we don't affect dreaming. So I suspect it probably isn't what we would call an endogenous neurotransmitter. It's probably not a natural transmitter that is mediating brain function. But maybe under periods of extreme stress, there might be something else in the brain as well, other than DMT, that turns on those receptors. I mean, serotonin itself, those receptors are called the serotonin 2A receptor because serotonin works on them as well. So it may be that
Yes.
that they're ready for a pulse of something that's really significant that releases serotonin, or maybe it's DMT, but probably not.
Really interesting. I love how many mysteries still exist around these things, and it just shows how much more research needs to be done and more funding is required. I'm speaking to Chris Timmerman in a few weeks, who is a leading DMT expert, so super excited to learn from him. One really interesting thing that I only learned today is that there's actually some contraindications between ayahuasca and DMT and SSRIs, that sometimes you can get serotonin syndrome, because effectively, what that drug is doing is creating an excess of serotonin.
Let's be clear about
this.
It's not the DMT that's the problem. It's the
Yes,
harmaline. It's the harmaline.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you mix a we do have medicines called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. In fact, the first antidepressant medicine was discovered by serendipity in the 1950s. It was a treatment that was being developed for tuberculosis. It was designed to kill the tuberculous bug. And people noticed, these chest physicians said, well, these people's lungs aren't getting any better, but they seem happier. And they spoke to the psychiatrists and they said, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I wonder if we give this medicine, which was called iproniazid, what happens if we give it to people who are depressed? And lo and behold, they started getting less depressed. So the first antidepressant was a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. In Western medicine, of course, it was in South American medicine, it was also a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, but they didn't. But that wasn't the chemical name wasn't known, of course. So mixing a monoamine oxidase inhibitor which prevents the breakdown of serotonin, as well as the breakdown of DMT, mixing that with a drug like an SSRI that gives you a massive increase in serotonin, that can be challenging. So we recommend people do not do that.
Yes. If you're on the plane over to Peru, I don't know. I don't know. And you're on SSRIs or on something. Have a think about the ayahuasca dose, or I don't know. Can you come off it a week before, 2 weeks before? Is that how it works? Is there any? I presume there's not really good guidelines here
Well, this is,
for
you're touching on now one of the really interesting questions, because there's a bigger question than you might have realized, Evan. Like most of your questions. So you've got to separate DMT from ayahuasca. So yes, if you're going for ayahuasca and you're on an SSRI, it would make sense to wean yourself as low as you can get before you go, to minimize the risk of the serotonin interaction. But if you're on SSRIs and you're taking DMT, in the Western medicine, there are companies developing DMT as a medicine. If you then take DMT, the SSRIs blunt the subjective effects of DMT in some people. And you can have a chat with Chris in a few weeks about that. We don't fully understand the mechanism, but it's probably got something to do with changing the serotonin receptor, because they both work through the serotonin receptor. So up till recently, well, my group was always trying to get people off SSRIs when we were giving them a psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin or DMT, because we wanted to maximize the experience. There are people who say, well, hang on, actually, the experience is only part of the benefit. There are other impacts. I think we talked about this last time, the neuroplasticity, which DMT is a very powerful neuroplastogen. And they say maybe you can get that despite being on SSRIs. And I think there is some evidence that is also true. So this is one of the big areas of uncertainty in research at present. What's the best thing in there? So there's a group in Switzerland who's getting exactly opposite. They put everyone on SSRIs before you give them a psychedelic, because that way the SSRIs will reduce the anxiety, so they'll have a better trip because they'll be less anxious. So it's a very complicated field at present.
Interesting. Yeah, so very undecided. That's super interesting. So how do we evaluate then ayahuasca and DMT relative to each other in terms of risks and harms? I would assume quite low, but hard to compare if one lasts. Am I right in saying like DMT, a trip can last 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, where ayahuasca can be up to like around 6 hours? Would that be about average?
Yeah, well, yes, people are having experiences generally through the night because they take it at night. So the answer is that I think so there's another qualification. I'm sorry, there's no easy answers in this field. But one of the things Chris will tell you, one of the things his group did when he was at Imperial was to develop an infusion of DMT. So this way you can put it in, so you don't get a bolt from the blue. You don't get heaven hitting you on the head with it. You can build it up, and then you can keep it at a level, so you can hold the experience for quite a lot longer. So then you can begin to get the duration that you might have, say, with psilocybin, a couple of hours in theory. In fact, we've gone one stage further. So here's something that I think is not related particularly to the psychedelic experience, but it's very related to the neuroplastogen experience. So there's preclinical evidence that psychedelics like DMT can help the brain recover from stroke, because recovering from stroke is about making new neural connections.
Yes.
So based on Chris's work, I've been advising a company who want to turn this into a medicine, and they started this, and we developed a 6-hour DMT infusion. But
oh my god,
no! But when they said to me, "We want to give DMT infusions to people with strokes," I said, "That's insane. People who've just had a stroke, you want them to trip?" And they said, "No. We're gonna." They said to me, "Invent an infusion that didn't make them trip, but would maximize plasticity." So we worked with a group in the Netherlands, and we invented this 6-hour infusion, and we did it so that they never trip. But their brain is,
interesting,
we believe, getting the stimulation to produce the plasticity. And that the trial is started. People with strokes are having DMT infusions in the Netherlands as we speak.
Incredibly interesting. Wow. And what does that fusion entail? What's the chemistry there? How are you extending
There's an IV,
the
it's just a
DMT
pump.
trip?
Well, it's just like you might, if you're in a hospital and you're having
Oh, so it's
intravenous
a constant.
antibiotics, you have a pump. You just pump it in at a steady rate. But when ask this to Chris. Chris has got
I
a really
will.
Chris has got a no. He's got an even cleverer idea. Chris says, "Oh, that's all very well, but we want people to have a trip. We don't want these sub-trip dosing." So
I agree.
he'll tell you when you speak with him. He will tell you how he's developing real-time feedback from the EEG. So he's going to
Ah.
do EEG recordings of people's experiences, because often they don't want to talk when they're actually in this other universe talking to entities. They don't want to talk to you because the entities are much more interesting. So he's trying to develop a system where the EEG will tell him when they're in the other universe, and then he can get that to feed back to the pump. So he can titrate the dosing to maximize the effect. And it's a really clever idea. So you grill him on that, all right?
Yeah, I absolutely will. I'm incredibly excited about that. That just the amount of things happening in this space is so it's so cool to see. It's taken so long, but it's amazing now. Finally, at last. I mean, after so much of you kicking down the doors of government trying to get this work done, it's great to see that there's some great work happening, and it's really exciting.
Well, Evan,
So where are we going to put?
yeah, I mean, we'd be doing a lot more if we didn't have. If we're not actually kicking the doors down. We're actually kicking on the door, but the door's still closed.
Yes.
There's only about 6 places in Britain that can do this. Anyway, where are we going to put DMT? We're going to put DMT down at D, and we're going to put it. So what's the left? What's the one on the left-hand one of D? Is that?
So you have acid and you have psilocybin mushrooms.
So we're going to put DMT between the two.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
And then we're going to put ayahuasca. We're going to put ayahuasca on the left. I think because of that, and we're going to put that because of the monoamine oxidase in the jungle. People often put other stuff with it, scopolamine and that. So we're going to make that. I think that's probably of those four the most worrying, if you see what I mean, if it's not done right. So move that to the left. There you go. Well done.
Yes,
Right.
super interesting. Okay, very nice. A really good coverage there and breakdown of different psychedelic effects. Super, super well done. Obviously, speaking to the expert on the topic, so just amazing.